Christopher Columbus returned to Europe after his second visit to the American islands. And he was held up from returning to America due to accusations from a man named Fonseca. You bitch-ass motherfucker. The Indians were already subjugated after the battle with Guanabo. Or how do you pronounce it? Guanabo? Guanabo. It started when Columbus came back from his trips to Jamaica and other islands, and so on and so forth. And then he came back to Hispaniola. The area was in revolt, which led to the subjugation and 15th century type laws and practices to pacify a population that was at war with the other group, right? He came back and he was like, "What the fuck did you guys do?" So, anyways, if you want reference to what happened during that time, there's episodes for that. They talk a little bit more about specifics, and I'm going to kind of a day-by-day Christopher Columbus, checking out the historical memoirs, documents, and so on and so forth on this channel, and I'm putting everything into a playlist on YouTube, not on Spotify or Rumble or any other, just on YouTube for now. There's a playlist if you want to see all the stuff on Columbus, all the stuff in the what we now call the United States by decade, and epics as well. So if you want to check out those playlists, go ahead there and press play, and it will play all of them one after the other. I think it might go backwards though, so it might be kind of confusing if you press play and it starts from the latest one to the first one, which should be the opposite. It's like reading a book backwards from the last chapter to the first chapter. But yeah, so now we're at the point where I'm backtracking a little bit, where Columbus returned to Europe after a second visit to the American islands and was about to make his third trip, and he was held up by this dude named Fonseca talking garbage. Him and his people were like, "Hey, man, this bullshit motherfucker ain't listening to us. Keep him here. He's a bitch." And they're like, okay. And then Columbus is like, "No, man, fuck those clowns. Those guys are the real bitches." Now, you see, Fonseca spoke to the crown since he was in charge of some matters at remote locations that Spain occupied at the time. And Christopher Columbus wanted sole authority. He's like, "I'm the king here, man." He didn't say king, but maybe authority, right? Some type of authority, governor, president, however he called himself. So anyways, he and Fonseca bumped heads, which led to possible jealousy, which had been written that way. Or it was solely that this difference made them enemies, these two guys, who fought for the control and power, which Fonseca said that he should have the say-so in what goes on in those remote places rather than Columbus himself. And Columbus is like, "Dude, you're not fucking here. How can you be calling the shots if you're not even here, dude? The government's always trying to get their hands in somebody else's business." So that's what we got, right? And so Columbus wanted sole authority, and Fonseca said, "Fuck you." And so supposedly from then on out, there was shit talking about Columbus. So they say, right? Therefore, Columbus was stuck in Europe for a whole year or more until he convinced the crown that Fonseca and his team were all bitch-ass liars, and that Columbus himself did things that were necessary to achieve peace on the island, that the level of danger rose immensely by that time when he came back to Hispaniola after investigating other islands, like I just mentioned. But eventually, Columbus was then allowed to travel back to the Americas in the year 1498. Yeah. Columbus wrote in his letter that on his second trip, he had documented that he had counted 700 fucking islands. Isn't that crazy? How the fuck did he count 700 islands? Holy shit, that's a lot of driving around. A lot of map making, right? In the Bahamas in the American islands. And he noted that the size of Hispaniola and how all of the inhabitants at that point should now pay tribute to the crown since what had happened during his second visit. And Columbus wrote that, here I'm going to quote Columbus, quote, "The abuse broke out and the disparagement and undertakings began because I had not sent back ships laden with gold," unquote. So this phrase sounds like Columbus had differences with the Indians after the subjugation that followed the battle, right? But deeper in that same paragraph on this letter, Columbus said that he was sorry for his sins, but he had good reason for doing what he did, and that the crown should understand him. Be like, dude, I understand. You had to do what you had to do. And at that time, when Columbus was doing these things, Columbus had become an object of loathing, right? Columbus said that at that point, people started to hate Columbus and didn't want to follow his orders or rules, right? And after some talk with the crown about the situation in America, among the Europeans, the crown allowed Columbus to return to America. He told the crown not to believe in what his countrymen had lied about. So, at this point, we don't know exactly what he was fighting about with various guys. We know that Fonseca was indifference with, got into some confrontations with other governors of the islands at the time, of the time period. So it's possible that Fonseca said one thing to the governors and Columbus said another thing. There's that possibility. And the guys that were on Fonseca's side talked shit about Columbus, and the other guys were on Columbus's side, right? We'll never know what exactly happened in this stupid fucking soap opera. But anyways, Columbus left Sanlúcar in Cadiz on Wednesday on May 30th in the year 1498. And this time he wrote that he was very stressed out and depressed by this time. He noted that he was very exhausted from his second trip and hoped to relax before his next, but left Europe on his third trip back to the American islands very stressed out and depressed. He had one ship and 2 caravels with him. They first stopped in the Canary Islands, while he had one group continue straight to the Americas, while he and others stopped for a while in the Canaries. And he did this in order to avoid the French fleet that was supposedly waiting to attack him near Cape St. Vincent. Right? He planned on traveling south to the equator and then taking some route straight west toward his destination in Hispaniola. He first stopped at the Cape Verde Islands, in which Columbus called the name a lie, since Cape Verde means Cape Green, like the Green Island. And he said there's nothing fucking green about this island at all. He said that it was a very dry and fucking ugly looking land. He said that all the inhabitants of the Cape Verde Islands were sick and fucking weak, and it was a fucked up place. And so Columbus, he's like, dude, I want a social distance from these people. I don't want to stay here very long. So they took off. And then they traveled some 480 miles at a point when he pointed to the North Star. And he's like, here it is, bitches. And at this point, he said that the heat at this point from the sun was so hot that he was afraid that the sun was going to burn or cook him and his passengers, or his people. There's global warming, climate change. He said that the heat was so heavy that nobody wanted to go below the ship to get food or anything else because it was so fucking hot down there. The men were exhausted and burnt from the sun. And this heat, due to climate change, possibly, lasted for 8 days. That was followed by heavy rain. And he said that if it was going to be sunny and hot one more day, He said Columbus said that he didn't think that him or any of his crew would have survived that heat if it was going to be one more day. He's like, man, it was so fucking bad. Nobody wanted to go underneath the bow to get some kind of water. He's like, we were fucking hot, man. We were going to die. People were laying around the sides of the ship trying to take some shade. Everybody was exhausted from the heat. We were all going to get burnt. But they survived because the rain came. So anyways, when they took off after some time sailing, Columbus decided to first go to a Carib island and get some water there since they were short on drink. Because they were fucking thirsty from the sun, right? They didn't have a lot of help from the wind in traveling, so the trip was longer than expected again, and they needed water. And they eventually sighted land on July 31st in 1498. And he had previously named this island Trinidad. The inhabitants were the Arawak group of people, a group of Indians that, like many other islands were, a subgroup of the Arawak. And he first reached a cape called La Gallia and hung out here for a while until they found some area to anchor at where the water was shallow enough to anchor. And he said that this island from the shoreline, he said the houses were really, really nice kept, and all the green of the island was cultivated. You know, all the fields were nice looking. He says it looks very organized and welcoming. And Columbus stopped there on the island to take some water and some wood for the ship, to repair his ship. And so they were ready to head out, and because they had all their needed provisions, right? And eventually they spotted a canoe that approached them with 24 men aboard that canoe that had weapons in their hands. And these men on the canoe were described as well-built and had lighter skin tone than the other Indians of other islands. And that these Indians had long, straight hair that resembled Spanish hair that was long and straight. The Indians wore a cloth around their head that resembled what the black Moors of Morocco wore around their head. And this cloth was elaborately patterned in colors. And they wore another one of these scarves around their waist to cover themselves up. So Columbus is like, who the fuck are these guys? This long hair. Long black hair and scarves on their head. So these men, these Indians stopped a good distance from the ship, and they were screaming towards the Christians. Abigaba! Who knows what the fuck they said? Nobody could understand each other's language, so, you know, that type of diversity fucked everybody up. Columbus really wanted to talk to these people and find out who they were, but they wouldn't come near the ship. No, they didn't know each other's language anyways, but instead these Indians stayed a distance and yelled at the Europeans as if the Europeans knew what the fuck they were saying. I wonder if one of the Indians were like, hey, dude, I don't think those guys speak our language. He's like, I want to keep yelling at them. But anyways, Columbus then thought of some strange tactic to bring these 24 men closer to the ship. So he's like, hey, I'm going to get all you guys together. Some of the men get some pots. Some other men get some pans. I see you got the tambourine over there. Get that going. I want you all to play some music. And then so the men started playing music, and then he got some young men to start dancing. He believed that if the men in the canoe seen the party going on the ship, that maybe the 24 Indians in the canoe would want to come and join the fun. And so there's fucking a bunch of fucking Europeans that were tired from the sun, in dirty clothes probably, jumping around, banging pots and pans and tambourines, singing and fucking dancing. And then the Indians in the canoe were probably like, what the fuck are these guys doing? Columbus said that the Indians would reluctantly draw closer at one moment and then back away again several different times, back and forth. And eventually, while these Indians watched the Europeans playing strange music with pots and pans and tambourines circling around a group of men dancing. The Indians didn't care for the music, so they dropped their fucking oars and started shooting arrows at the men. They're like, "You guys, music sucks," and tried killing them. The Indians had shields, I guess, that they shot their arrows from behind. And Columbus immediately ordered the men to stop dancing and grab their crossbows and shoot back. That's what Christopher Columbus wrote in this letter. Why would Columbus have to fucking tell his men to stop dancing? He's like, dude, those Indians are killing us with fucking bow and arrow and shit. The arrows are flying around, so stop. It'd probably be a good idea to stop dancing and go grab our weapons. And everybody's like, good idea. Good idea, boss. That's what's written. Yeah, so that's a strange thing that happened that day. I mean, why the fuck would he write it? Unless it happened. Something similar at least, or at least in his perspective, right? Anyways. So the Indians, so the Europeans started fighting back with their crossbows, and then there was a little battle going on. The Indians didn't like that the Europeans were fighting back, so they rowed their fucking canoes under the stern of another caravel to hide from the shots, right? That's fucking crazy. Why would the Indians ride behind another ship of Europeans? But that's what they said happened. And while these Indians were taking shelter behind the other European ship, the European captain of that ship talked to the Indians, and he said that they told the Indians that they came in peace and wanted just to talk to these guys. And one of the Europeans gave a jacket and a hat to one of the Indians that they assumed was the chief of the crew. And so I guess they're somewhat friendly with each other at that moment. And after some talking with each other through gesture, I guess, right? Because they couldn't speak each other's language. Not even fucking remotely close, because like the languages were so different, right? Like, some people say, I could take a word from here or there, but no, they're completely no way to communicate but by hand, right? Gesture. But eventually the Indians agreed to meet the Europeans on an island to talk with each other. And now these Indians agreed to meet with the people on this boat. So the Indians made their way to the shore of the island. And the European captain did not want to go to the island without permission from Columbus. So the European caravel went to the ship of Columbus to ask him permission and tell him what was going on. And when the Indians seen that the two groups of Europeans were talking, the Indian men got back in their canoe and drove off to never be seen again. They're like, fuck this, man. I didn't know those guys were friends. That's what's written. So, who were these fucking Indians with long black hair that resembled the Spanish style, but wore colorful scarves around their head that resembled the black Moors of Islamic Morocco? Who were these motherfuckers? And why did these Indians start shooting arrows when the Europeans were dancing? And why would they agree to meet on the island and then change their mind? Why would Columbus write that they'd never seen them again? The exact quote was, I never saw them again, or any of the inhabitants of the island. Columbus wasn't able to talk to the people or come close to them to see what the headscarf actually looked like or what it was made of. So we are left to assume who these people were or who they were influenced by to wear those headscarves. Now a bunch of people like, Muslims are going to be like, it was us, man. See, we told you we were here first. And then black people are going to be like, see, I told you. We were there first, man. Only we wear headscarves. And so, yeah. And it's just because of these references that they give people the idea that they could fucking say one thing or another, make up some other bullshit, right? I play guitar, so I made hundreds, maybe thousands of songs in my lifetime at this point. And anytime I show a song to somebody's always got to say reference to somebody else. It sounds like this, it sounds like that. Your music, this song sounds like Nirvana, or sounds like Bob Dylan, or it sounds like fucking somebody else, all right? Just when I thought the song was purely mine, my ideas, somebody's always trying to say it sounds like something else. Because we humans always reference to it shit, right? So Columbus saw something and he's like, well, it kind of looks like something else I've seen. Just like when they say everything tastes like chicken, right? Some people hate that. Not everything tastes like fucking chicken. So were these headscarves the exact same thing that fucking the Moors were wearing? Or were they similar to what the Moors were wearing? I don't know. But a lot of Taino or Arawakan type headdresses usually have feathers in them. And he didn't write that they had feathers in their hair. He said they had colorful scarves on their head and colorful scarves around their waist, or as for breeches. And so, what the fuck was it? And they never seen those guys again, so they couldn't say like. And then we ended up seeing them again, and this is what they were, right? And he said that they were a lighter shade of Indians. Like, if you look at the Indians of Mexico of today, the western part of Mexico, where northern from the southern border, and like Jalisco or Michoacan, they have lighter skin, and I guess in Peru they also do, right? But in southern Mexico, they have where the Mayan population was. They're usually shorter with darker skin. So yeah, they could have had separate groups of people living on those islands. And so he was just mentioning that these particular guys had lighter skin tones. Now, the way the people look back then compared to now, because they say a lot of people are mestizo in these south of United States border. A lot of people are mestizos, and they're either mixed with African or European blood. And so we don't know what people would have looked like 20 years or 500 years ago, because it was 20 generations ago. Approximately 20 generations. Now, if they had kids when they were 12 years old or 15 years old, they could have been 30 or 40 generations ago, or 50, depending on how young people were when they had their first kids, right? And so with all that intermixing, interracial couples, if somebody's mixed with, like I have Spanish blood and Spanish and Mexican blood in me, but I have such a small amount you couldn't tell by just looking at me. And that's only within the last 100 years, or 120, 125 years, approximately. Now, times 500 years ago, and so that's how much blood has changed, skin tone and so on and so forth, through mixing and interracial couples, right? So it's hard to know who these actual 24 dudes were that were in the canoe and where they actually came from, if they were from the islands or from the mainland at that point. But in the next episode, we're going to get to when Christopher Columbus visited the mainland Americas. They could have been people from Venezuela at the time that were in that canoe. But we will never know, because he said that they never seen him again. So it was just an interesting time. So anyways, that's it for this episode. Gonna cut it short with that, just so you could digest that idea, do some research, look into it. And I know you hate these ideas and these episodes, so it'd be a good idea to break your computer or whatever device you're using to hear this on, and maybe that'll put an end to to you hearing me. So you could send this episode or this channel, share it with your friends and your enemies so they could hate you for it. Like if you got any differences with somebody and you hate them so much, you could send them this episode to really piss them off. Why the fuck did you send me that? Especially one of the cancel culture people. Send this episode to them. They'll hate it because they don't want to know nothing about this kind of specifics, right? But then again, maybe they will. See, I told you. So anyways, that's it. I'm out of here. Stay tuned for the next episode. Adios.